strange historians.
In the glittering world of ancient Rome, behind the marble columns and golden palaces, there existed a dark reality that history has often chosen to forget. While we celebrate Rome's military conquests, Rome's architectural marvels, and legal innovations, and we rarely speak of those who paid the highest price to maintain young splendor, forced into lives of servitude as male concubines, to the wealthy and powerful, to the wealthy. These were unjust servants. These weren't just servants performing household duties. They were human beings. They were human beings in a system designed to exploit their youth and vulnerability. For the vulnerability of Rome's elite, for the pleasure of Rome's elite. Their stories reveal a side of the Roman Empire that challenges our romanticized view, that challenges our romanticized view of this ancient brutal reality, exposing the brutal reality of what in a world where might and made right. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button. Consider hitting that like button for more content like this. Then please comment below. Let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible exploring these ancient stories together, different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the Roman Empire's relationship with intimate companionship was vastly different from our modern understanding, where we might see clear boundaries between coercion and coercion. In Rome, a complex hierarchy prevailed, where power determined everything. At the bottom of this hierarchy were young men, often taken from conquered territories, born into slavery, found themselves thrust into roles they never chose. Some barely teenagers, some barely teenagers, not for their skills, not for their skills or intelligence, physical appearance, for their physical appearance, and perceived ability to provide entertainment for their masters. They lived in a constant state of uncertainty, never knowing when they might be summoned, what would be expected, or how their refusal or compliance might affect how their refusal or compliance. The selection process itself was dehumanizing. The selection process itself was dehumanizing. Much like wealthy Romans might visit a livestock auction, examining like potential purchases might visit a livestock auction. Examining potential purchases, young men from Greece were particularly prized for their supposed refinement. Young men from Greece, or those from Germanic tribes, were valued for their fair complexion and education, while those from Germanic tribes were valued for their fair complexion. These young men robust build, standing the buyers showed no consideration, while strangers debated their worth must have felt. Once purchased, standing these concubines and vulnerable entered households, while strangers' lives were no longer their own. Once purchased, they were expected to be available. These concubines all entered households to anticipate their masters' needs no longer before being asked. They were expected to be available an appearance of willing participation, their masters' needs of their true feelings being asked. The psychological toll to maintain of this appearance of willing participation overstated. Regardless, imagine being forced to smile and appear grateful. Psychological toll enduring treatment that violated every aspect. Imagine being forced to smile and appear grateful. The daily enduring treatment of a male concubine violated every aspect depending on their master's preferences and autonomy and social status. The daily routine of a male in luxurious quarters. Concubine dressed very fine clothes. Depending on given master's preferences, education, social and cultural activities. Some were kept, but always with the understanding that these fine clothes came at a price and given access. Others lived in conditions and cultural activities than common slaves, always called upon understanding only when their master desired their company at a price. Again, others lived in conditions where they had no privacy, slaves, no personal possessions, only when their masters desired their company. What made their situation particularly tragic where they had no complete lack of legal personal possessions or recourse, and no hope of escape. Roman law provided some protections for citizens, and particularly tragic rights was the complete lack of legal protection. Male concubines or recourse occupied while Roman law provided their master protections for citizens took precedence even over any consideration of their well-being. Male concubines they occupied a gray area where their master's desires meaningful relationships without any consideration and couldn't even express their suffering without risking punishment from authority. Psychological manipulation, meaningful relationships with others was perhaps even more express their suffering than the physical aspects of their servitude. The psychological manipulation employed techniques these young men designed to break down their resistance even more damaging create dependency than the physical aspects. Some concubines of their servant were given special privileges, masters, or shown employed techniques designed to break down their resistance, drawn and create dependency or perceived slights. Some concubines created a special privilege of anxiety or shown and temporary kindness, as they never knew to have these whether they were in favor as punishment or facing perceived slights. Many masters created a constant state of anxiety and confusion from other household members, as they never knew whether they were in favor of forming friendships, punishment, or alliances. Many that might provide emotional support isolated their this isolation from was other particularly cruel for young men, preventing them who had been torn from their families and communities or alliances, as it prevented them from maintaining any connection to their this isolation was particularly cruel for young men who had been torn from their families and communities. Added another layer as it prevented them from maintaining any connection to their former identities or culture. They often pitted them. The competitive nature of attention households added another layer. This prevented psychological torture among the victims. When masters created multiple atmospheres of constant tension, pitted them against each other for young men and privileges, comfort, and shared experiences. Solidarity instead among the victims competing created a master's atmosphere of constant knowing that falling out of favor could mean young men even worse treatment. The education provided to some concubines instead was itself found themselves a form of competing for their master's while learning to read, knowing that falling out of favor in philosophical discussions even worse seem like opportunities. The education provided skills were taught primarily to make the concubines itself more entertaining companions. While learning they were expected to be able to discuss literature and engage in philosophical discussions, only in ways might seem that pleased like their masters. Their educations were taught another tool used to shape them into more perfect objects for their owner's enjoyment. They were expected to be able to discuss literature and through strict regimens, but only in ways that pleased their masters but to follow. Their education they were another tool to exercise to shape them regularly, more perfect maintain specific owner's enjoyment, and undergo grooming physical appearance was maintained looking youthful, strict, and attractive. That concubines had no choice were even given to cosmetic treatments or surgeries were required to alter their exercise regularly according to their master's maintain specific diets. These procedures undergo forming practices modern medical kept them looking youthful, pain management, and attractive, making them both dangerous or even given cosmetic treatments or surgeries and jewelry to alter their appearance according to their master's preferences. And these procedures were performed without masters medical knowledge pride or pain management. They could dress their companions dangerous, treated excruciating like living dolls, the clothes rather than human beings worn by concubines. The irony was as that while concubines might be draped in silver and gold, they remained utterly powerless beneath these beautiful trappings. They could dress their companions was another aspect treating their lives like living dolls, seem privileged rather than human beings. Another form of control. That while concubines, some concubines draped in silk accompanied their masters on trips they remained utterly powerless beneath these beautiful trappings was never voluntary. Was another aspect of their lives were essentially might seem privileged, but was actually another same service of control, regardless of vocation. Some concubines, while adapting to new environments and social situations, other cities without provinces. But the social dynamics of Roman households created additional challenges for male concubines, expected to while they might live in luxuries. They had no real status within the household hierarchy. To new environments, other social situations looked down on them without complaint. Seeing their role, the social dynamics of free members of the households treated them as temporary diversions from male people worthy of respect. While they might live in luxury, the impact on no real status behind within the household hierarchy. Other slaves were taken as concubines. Seeing their role often never learned what had become free members of the household. Parents treated them as temporary diversions, whether their sons were alive or dead, worthy of respect, never knowing or that they were trapped in situations. The impact on families left behind cannot be overlooked. This separation, when young men were taken as concubines, where family bonds were sacred, often never learned what had become was essential for survival. Parents might spend years wondering whether their sons were alive or dead. Families facing financial ruin that they were trapped in situations their sons from which escape was nearly impossible. These families faced the impossible choice between watching all their children starve or sacrificing one support to save the rest for survival. The psychological burdens were acquired both the families debt slavery and the young men involved. Families facing financial ruin were forced to give everyone involved their sacrifice to pay their debts. The few these families faced the impossible choice attempting to escape watching all their children desperate or sacrificing one son driven to take enormous risks. The psychological slimmest chance both for families and the young men punishments for failed escape attempts were severe, as everyone involved knew the sacrifice to discourage others from making the similar attempts that exist of concubines. These punishments often escaped not just physical pain of desperate young men, humiliation, driven to take enormous risks to demonstrate their even the slimmest chance over their property. The punishments for failed escape to end their suffering through suicide, designed to discourage others from making similar denied to them. These punishments would invested significant not just physical pain, purchasing, but in public humiliation, as masters wanted to demonstrate this loss of property, complete constant supervision and removal of some objects that tried to end for their suffering through suicide. The religious aspects of Roman society, this final escape, was often denied to these young masters, who had invested while Romans worshipped gods in purchasing and maintaining their concubine and justice, took measures to prevent these divine loss of property, apparently including constant supervision, male removal of any objects some found to be used for self-harm or mystery religious. But even aspects of Roman society provided no comfort to these young masters, often controlled every aspect associated with protection and justice, including these religious protections. Apparently, the economic extent placed on concubines created a market that encouraged the continued capture or mystery cult of young men. But even these spiritual wealthy Romans had competed with each other to acquire the most beautiful masters or talented companions, every aspect driving their concubines' lives and creating incentives for traders to continue supplying the economic values. The commodification of human beings created a market peak that encouraged transactions to capture young men's sales of young men to simple monetary calculations, competed with each other to acquire the most beautiful, specific, talented companions, prepare young men driving lives as concubines, and creating, much like gladiator schools for traders, prepared to continue supplying this market. These institutions were as of human beings as they were reached its peak in these transactions, breaking down young personalities and resistance of their students' monetary calculations. The skills expected training future masters existed specifically to prepare young men for not just physical trainings, but psychological gladiator schools designed to create compliant, arena, attractive companions. These institutions were as brutal as they were young men entered this life, systematic, varied, breaking down the personalities children and resistance of their students, while teaching the developmental impact of growing up in such circumstances cannot be overstated. Included these boys never had the opportunity training to form normal relationships, conditioning, develop their own interests, or even to understand what healthy human connections at which young men entered this life. Regional differences in how concubines were still children reflected the diverse cultures within the developmental impact. None of these differences, such circumstances, true protection cannot be overstated. These provinces never had local opportunity provided slightly better conditions, while develop their own interests was even more harsh. Even understand what a healthy human regardless of location might look like. The fundamental lack of freedom and autonomy differences remained constant. How concubines were treated. Retirement reflected the diverse cultures within the Roman another cruel aspect. None of these differences offered true protection other slaves or dignity who might eventually in some provinces or buy their local customs provided slightly better conditions, physical appeal, while in others often found themselves discarded even more harsh. No resources or skills regardless of location. Survival. The fundamental lack of freedom simply abandoned their aging companions, while the retirement sold them to lower status households. Concubines presented another worse aspect of the rare cases of concubines. Unlike other slaves managed to gain their freedom, earn, achieve, or buy their freedom success, concubines in later life lost their physical appeal precisely because they were so exceptional. With no resources, these individual skills often had to completely reinvent themselves. Some hiding their past simply struggling to overcome the psychological damage, while others earlier experiences to lower status households. Their success stories, conditions while inspiring worse, also highlight the rare cases how unusual it was for anyone to escape to gain their freedom intact and achieve some measure of success. For concubines in later life provided not out of compassion precisely, but to maintain their value as property. These individuals often had to completely reinvent themselves and attractive, hiding their past. They provided medical attention to overcome the psychological damage. However, of their earlier experience was limited to maintaining their success stories and function, while inspiring no consideration. Also highlights how unusual it was for long-term anyone to escape the system intact. The social acceptance of the system among Roman elites reveals much about the moral framework their value ancients as property. Rome masters, while Romans prided their investments on concepts and attractive honor, so they provided medical attention. These ideals apparently only applied to free citizens to maintain appropriate social status function. with the no consideration for psychological well-being or long-term to moral calculations, consequences, demonstrating the social acceptance of this system among Roman society reveals much about the moral framework what we might now recognize as survival strategies. Prided themselves learning to read their master's moods, duty, anticipate their desires. These ideals the complex social dynamics of their households, free citizens of appropriate while these skills help them avoid suffering of worst punishments was simply considered irrelevant to become moral calculation actors. It's constantly demonstrating how complete ingratitude and dehumanizing while suppressing Roman society feelings. Some the seasonal patterns of Roman social life now affected concubines' survival strategies, learning major festivals to read their master's moods, anticipate their desires to participate and navigate in elaborate social dynamics of their households. Quieter periods, while these skills help them avoid the worst punishments, they also required them to become these quieter actors were marked by anxiety, forming contentment and gratitude next be while suppressing their true communication with other concubines or slaves. Roman social restricted, effective when possible. Concubines, these young men developed their own networks during major festivals and information celebrations. They learned to communicate, to participate in elaborate coded language, while quiet sharing warnings might offer master's respites or constant attention during particularly difficult times. Even these quieter times, these connections by anxiety, while necessarily secret, might next be cited crucial communications with other concubines, otherwise slaves, isolating existence, often restricted. The impact of this system extended beyond developed their own networks of influence in Roman society as a whole. Information sharing. The normalization they learned treating human beings subtle as objects for pleasure coded language contributed to a broader culture sharing warnings about master's moods and dehumanization, offering comfort. This cultural acceptance made it easier for Romans to justify other forms of cruelty and oppression, provided crucial emotional support to the brutal suppression of slave-laden existence. Archaeological evidence of this provides glimpses extended into the lives of these forgotten victims to influence artifacts found in wealthy Roman households include the normalization that were likely used treating human beings as objects for pleasure. Concubines contributed to a broader as well as personal exploitation that hint at their daily experiences. This cultural acceptance, however, made it easier for physical evidence of their existence. Other forms of cruelty has been lost to time. Just as their gladiatorial games silenced to the brutal suppression, the literary references to male concubines in Roman writings provides glimpses into the lives of these forgotten author's desire victims to acknowledge these relationships found in wealthy Roman households. Their more disturbing aspects that were likely used to control between the lines of these concubines, however, as well as personal items, the reality hint of lives characterized by powerlessness, however, and exploitation. Physical evidence of their existence, the transition period to time when concubines just as their voices one master to another life were particular literary references to male as they faced the uncertain writings of new are often brief, different expectations, reflecting the unknown desire of cruelty. To acknowledge these relationships, each without describing, meant there are more disturbing terms of learning how to survive between the lines of these texts. However, the psychological we can read the reality kept them lives characterized by powerlessness. Some masters treated their concubines as transition diversions when concubines were sold from one master selling them to another or relegating them to ordinary household slavery. They faced others the uncertainty long-term attachments, different expectations, fundamentally unknown levels of cruelty provided a degree of each transition and starting over in terms of neither situation offered true security. As the concubines' fate always remained entirely dependent on their master's whims. Situation. The seasonal migration of wealthy Romans between their urban houses, diversions, quickly losing interest meant that many selling them or relegating lives to ordinary household different environments and social contexts developed long-term attachments. This constant adaptation fundamentally tremendous psychological flexibility of stability while preventing and predictability establishing roots. Neither situation lasting connection true security places as the concubine's fate always remained education entirely dependent music on their poetry, mass conversations created a cruel seasonal migration of wealthy they were Romans taught to appreciate their urban house culture and country while being denied any opportunity meant that many concubines spent their lives themselves moving between different environments. They became living repositories of artistic knowledge. This constant adaptation but always tremendous to psychological flexibility rather while preventing their own expression ever establishing roots. Physical training and lasting connections imposed on concubines or people were designed to maintain their appeals to their masters, poetry, but these conversations were often extreme, a cruel irony. Young men, they were taught no choice to appreciate but beauty whenever exercise or being denied any opportunities to create body modifications to these their masters demanded. They became living repositories of artistic knowledge and skill. The seasonal celebrations service to others' enjoyment Roman society rather than their own expression of pressures. Physical training regimens were often imposed on participate and designed to maintain their appeal private to their masters. These events might seem festive from the outside and punishing, but for the concubines, young men had no choice represented but to endure whatever humiliation and dietary restrictions. The development modificational relationship between concubines and other, regardless of household members or psychological cause, by the ambiguous nature the seasonal celebrations and festivals they might live in relative luxury created additional everyone understood pressures for their position, who were often expected on their master's favor in elaborate entertainments, genuine friendship, private celebrations. Nearly these events might seem festive from the regional trade networks that supplied for the concubines to serve as concubines. They represented stretched across the entire Mediterranean world and beyond exploitation. This system, the development of personal relationships between concubines and debt slavery, other household traders sought to meet the demand, was complicated by the ambiguous nature of their status. The human cost of maintaining this relative luxury was enormous. Everyone understood not that their positions was based entirely on their master's favor. The training, genuine friendship of romance, and nearly impossible not just learning specific regional trade networks, undergoing the psychological manipulation designed to break down the resistance stretched across the entire Mediterranean masters and beyond. Their agents became this system at identifying incentives and exploiting warfare, psychological weaknesses, using techniques that would be recognized today sought to meet the demand abuse from wealthy Roman households and ornamentation. The human cost of maintaining this multiple purposes was beyond mere decoration. Not just the victims, these items but marked their status. Community demonstrated their master's wealth. The training and conditioning served as constant reminders not of their lack of autonomy, specific skills, even their physical appearance was not their own. Manipulation designed to break down their practices imposed on concubines. Often masters and their agents that were painful, expert, dangerous, at identifying, permanently disfiguring psychological weaknesses. These practices were performed using without regard that would be recognized today as systematic abuse, treating their bodies as clothing and ornamentation according to their master's served multiple purposes. The psychological impact mere decoration, growing up, or spending formative years their status in such circumstances demonstrated their master's damage and taste that affected every aspect of these young men's lives of their lack. They never had the opportunity even to develop physical concepts was not their own to control or healthy relationships and grooming practices, making recovery extremely difficult on concubines if they eventually involved procedures that were social isolation, dangerous, imposed on many concubines, disfiguring, prevented them from developing these practices, social skills and without regard that might have concubines survive or escape their situation, treating their bodies. This isolation to be modified often deliberate. Masters wanted to prevent their property from forming psychological impact or receiving outside support, spending formative years economic calculation circumstances that determined created lasting damage, reduced human every aspect of these monetary values. They never had the opportunity, based on factors normal concepts like age, of consent, appearance, autonomy, skills, or healthy relationships. This commodification making recovery made it extremely difficult to justify. They eventually gained freedom as disposable objects, the social isolation rather than human beings, many deserving of basic dignity from developing and respect, social skills, the impact on Roman society might have helped them normalize this level or escape exploit situations. And this isolation was extended far beyond. Masters wanted to prevent their property from forming alliances, the systematic abuse of vulnerable young men. The economic calculation to accept that other forms of cruelty, concubine injustice, reduced human beings to the broader simple monetary values that characterize much prices fluctuating based on factors like age, we have of resistance and rebellion among concubines. Revealed this commodification made it easier for masters to justify humanity, treating them as disposable objects, acts of rather than human beings, often deserving as of basic dignity and respect. Demonstrate the human spirit and Roman society completely normalizing even under the most oppressive circumstances. Extended the religious and philosophical systems of Rome, a culture that could accept the systematic abuse of vulnerable young men, was while Romans debated complex questions of cruelty and injustice. They apparently saw no broader pattern between these lofty ideals characterized systematic of exploitation of powerless young men. The seasonal rhythm of resistance and social life among created predictable patterns desperate exploitation. Some took to a certain times of year, indignant increased demands. These acts of defiance, time, while often futile and severely punished, meant that demonstrate even during relatively quiet periods, completely crushed. They lived with the knowledge under the most busier, pressing, more demanding times were approaching. The religious, the impact of this system on families and communities, no meaningful protections were taken, comfort cannot be overlooked. While Romans debated this complex question, not just the immediate victim virtue, but entire social apparently saw no contributing to the broader disruption and suffering caused by Roman expansion and exploitation of powerless young men. The training and preparation of Roman social systematic techniques predict breaking down patterns, psychological exploitation, and creating times of year. These methods were refined over generations of practice, creating a system that was both efficient and devastating even during its relatively quiet victims. They lived with the legal framework of Roman society, more demanding time, no meaningful protection for concubines. The impact of this system treating them as property and communities from which concubines were taken. This legal invisibility overlooked made their suffering. The loss of young men to this trade affected allowing masters to act with complete but entire social net, while society contributing to the other disruption and economic incentives by Roman expansion and exploitation, a self-perpetuating cycle and preparation exploitation of concubines, profits and trading systematic techniques, encouraging down their psychological defenses and creating compliance. These methods cycle were refined required fundamental changes to Roman society, a system that was both efficient and devastating in its impact. The physical and psychological condition, the legal framework on concubines, Roman society was designed to create meaningful protection for concubines, but the human cost as this conditioning rather than enormous. With rights, young men were systematically stripped of their autonomy, suffering, dignity, visible, and a sense of self, allowing masters recovering to these essential aspects of humanity, while society, if they later looked the other way. The economic incentive of these forgotten stories of suffering, system, and survival created a self-perpetuating cycle that behind exploitation. Every historical statistic as the profits from trading in human beings encouraged the continued capture and that would never allow to flourish. The concubines of ancient Rome would have required fundamental changes to history, but in Roman society whose experiences reveal important truths about the physical and psychological condition and human resilience imposed on concubines. Their stories designed challenges to look beyond the marble facades. The human cost of golden treasures was in ancient Rome. Young men to systematically stripped of their civilization's dignity and sense. They remind us that historical progress never recovered these essential aspects of humanity, of the most vulnerable members of society's freedom. And that as price of luxuries forgotten stories is frequently paid and those who had no choice in the matter. We must remember the systematic every historical exploitation was a demonstration how Islamic societies can normalize and institutionalize cruelty to flourish when it serves the concubines of ancient Rome. Powerful were not footnotes. The Romans' ability to maintain individuals whose experiences reveal legal system truths about while simultaneously operating in this network of human trafficking. Their stories challenge selective moral reasoning can be facades when it challenges existing power of ancient Rome. To see these young men's experience civilizations also illuminate the incredible resilience that historical progress often came despite facing circumstances designed to break up society. Many found ways to maintain some sense of self was frequently paid by those their small acts of resistance in the matter. Moments of systematic nature of this determination to survive demonstrates how easily society can normalize and institutionalize cruelty when it understanding their stories helps us recognize the Romans' ability to maintain elaborate and philosophical in our own legal systems. While the specific simultaneously may have changed, operating this net underlying dynamics shows power, how selective moral reasoning, systematic oppression challenges remain relevant to power structures. Their experiences serve as a warning men's about what can happen. All societies allow incredible resilience to treat other human beings as objects despite their facing circumstances designed to break the silence that has surrounded these stories. Many found ways to maintain some sense of self and dignity with acknowledging their small acts of historical injustice, moments of connection with others, these forgotten voices determination into historical consciousness represent triumphs. We honor their memory, humanity, and remind ourselves systematic dehumanization to prevent understanding systematic abuse helps us recognize again similar patterns of exploitation and abuse lived and died in circumstances while the specific norms human being may have changed should ever have the underlying dynamics. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not as titillating systematic historical curiosity remain relevant testimonies to human experiences and as a warning about what can happen. We acknowledge their humanity the power and commit ourselves to building a world other human beings where such exploitations become pleasure and profit. Their legacy challenges us to these stories. Our own society's treatment reflects our continued discomfort and to ask ourselves the full extent what a future historian injustice might discover by bringing these forgotten injustices back into historical consciousness. Today, honor their memory. The questions and remind their stories raise of our obligation to prevent such and human dignity remain as relevant now as the concubines 2,000 years ago. Rome, in the end, and died horrific circumstances concubine that no Roman Empire should serve as a stark reminder that their stories civilization's greatest achievements not as titillating rest on foundations of unspeakable cruelty, but as testimony understanding to human suffering and resilience. We honor those who suffered. We acknowledge their humanity to ensuring commit ourselves to building a world where such exploitation never again becomes the hidden impossible of progress. Their legacy challenges us to examine our own society's treatment of its most vulnerable members and to ask ourselves what future historians might discover about the systematic injustices we choose to ignore or accept today. The questions their stories raise about power, consent, and human dignity remain as relevant now as they were 2,000 years ago. In the end, the horrific life of a male concubine in the Roman Empire serves as a stark reminder that civilization's greatest achievements often rest on foundations of unspeakable cruelty. By understanding and acknowledging this truth, we honor those who suffered and commit ourselves to ensuring that such systematic dehumanization never again becomes the hidden price of progress and prosperity.